BBC2 in a moment explores the controversial idea that wartime French resistance was more propaganda than reality in myths and memories of World War II. Here on BBC One, in 15 minutes, the mystery is finally solved in the last part of Alan Plater's Oliver's Travels. That's after the main evening news from the BBC with Peter Sissons. It's 9:05.
French Navy commandos have boarded the Greenpeace flagship Rainbow Warrior in the South Pacific. The vessel and its crew had ignored a warning to stay out of France's nuclear test zone. Orange men and police deadlocked in Northern Ireland as the marchers are denied their route through a nationalist area. And Pete Sampras earns his place among the Wimbledon greats. Good evening. The Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior, which is in the South Pacific protesting against the planned resumption of French nuclear tests, has been boarded by French commandos. Activists on board reported being stormed by masked men using tear gas before communications were cut. The French Navy had been authorized to fire on any ship that came within 12 miles of its test site at Mururoa Atoll. The Rainbow Warrior entered the zone this afternoon despite a last warning.
It had been a cat-and-mouse game, the Rainbow Warrior shadowed by French warships as she headed defiantly for the nuclear test ground. Greenpeace had told the world it wanted to get to the atoll despite French warnings that their warships had been authorized to fire on any vessel which gets within 12 miles. Aboard the Rainbow Warrior, tension mounted as they taunted the shadowing ships.
Well, at the present time, we're about a mile west of the exclusion. We're now going at full speed. We're crossing the exclusion zone, 12-mile territorial zone, and I'm making to go into Mururoa Atoll.
Late this afternoon, the French issued a warning, then commandos boarded the ship.
They're obviously trying to bang out of the door handle. There's something coming through the door. No, they're going to put tear gas up. Yeah, they just put tear gas. Tom, stick your head out the window. Pull the sign over, please. Quick, open the other port. Open the other port, children. There's Zodiac heading towards us with commandos. I'm looking out the port. There's two frigates.
All contact has now been lost with the Rainbow Warrior. Tomorrow is the 10th anniversary of the sinking of the original Greenpeace flagship by French agents in Auckland Harbour. It had been on a similar mission to protest against French nuclear testing. Last month, President Chirac reversed a 3-year-old commitment to a moratorium on nuclear tests, announcing 8 new underground blasts in the face of international condemnation. Greenpeace wants the French to change their minds. Jackie Rowley, BBC News.
An Orange Order march at Portadown in County Armagh has been prevented by the Royal Ulster Constabulary from marching through a mainly Catholic area in the town. It resulted in a tense standoff between loyalists and police officers.
The Protestant Orange Order has been marching through Portadown in July for generations, and today the annual march began as usual through the predominantly Protestant parts of the town. But also marching today were residents of a Catholic neighbourhood through which the Orangemen normally pass. They demanded that this year, with a ceasefire in force, the march should be diverted from their street, which has traditionally been the focus of tension between the two communities. The release of Private Lee Clegg had heightened their anger, and it became clear that this time there was no intention to move. The police, who for the first time in years were not backed up by the army, acted swiftly as the Orangemen began leaving church for the last part of their march. They blocked the road, telling the marchers to turn round. There followed a tense and angry standoff as the Orangemen faced down the police, who they've traditionally seen as protecting their right to march.
The Brown of Portadown will not be moving. Let it be hours, let it be days, let it be weeks. We are for staying until such times as we walk our traditional route down the Gilbody Road.
Attempts to defuse the standoff got nowhere. And the police were taken by surprise when at one point stones were thrown, injuring 2 police officers. The Orangemen, who already feel the political tide is running against them, are worried about the precedent being set just as the marching season reaches its climax. Tonight, the tension continues to rise. The number of Orangemen and their supporters has grown steadily, and in response, the police have brought in reinforcements in riot gear. John Devitt, BBC News, Portadown.
Bosnian Serb troops have been advancing on the UN-designated safe area of Srebrenica, detaining United Nations soldiers as they move forward. UN observation posts have been overrun, and some 30 Dutch UN troops are now in the hands of the Serbs.
Around 30,000 civilians are crammed into Srebrenica. The Bosnian government says they've been pushed back into the Stone Age. These latest amateur pictures have just been smuggled out. A small contingent of Dutch troops has been put there by the UN to protect the enclave. From Sarajevo, ham radio operators talk to Srebrenica. They've been told that civilians there have been killed by Serb shells. The Bosnian Serbs have been attacking the Srebrenica enclave for the last 3 days. They've taken a big block of land to the south. The Dutch UN peacekeepers have been driven out of these key observation posts. Now the Serbs have brought up tanks, which the UN says are a direct threat to the town of Srebrenica, which it has promised to defend. The Bosnian government wants the immediate use of force to drive the Serbs back.
Any weapon shelling inside the area must be destroyed. And NATO can do it and is willing to do it.
At the UN headquarters in Sarajevo, a senior official said they'd called a council of war to consider airstrikes and to worry about the safety of the captured Dutch peacekeepers.
Well, I think the longer they remain in Bosnian Serb captivity, the more we start to call them detainees, and when some kind of demand is made for their release, then of course immediately, in our eyes, they become hostages.
This looks as if it's turning into another big test of the resolve of the United Nations. If it can persuade or force the Serbs to pull back from Srebrenica, it will start to regain some of the credibility it has lost in this country. But if it can't protect the citizens of what is, after all, its own UN-designated safe area, then its mission here will slide into terminal decline. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
An American hostage kidnapped by Kashmiri separatists in the Himalayas has made a dramatic escape. John Childs was rescued from a snow-capped ridge by helicopter after waving his pullover to attract attention. He told the authorities in Srinagar that the 2 Britons and 1 American still held captive are being treated well.
Snow-blinded, blistered, hungry and confused. When John Childs saw a helicopter late in the afternoon, he feared he might have crossed the border into Pakistan. It was 15 hours since he'd escaped from his armed kidnappers at dead of night, but by an extraordinary chance, the helicopter was carrying the 2 men coordinating India's rescue attempt. When John Childs was convinced they were friendly, he came aboard and was flown to safety.
John Childs is now inside the government guest house in Srinagar in intensive discussions with diplomats and Indian security officials. He was the last of the 4 to be kidnapped when militants swept through this valley last Tuesday, seizing any Westerner they met. The hostages were all gathered here at the campsite where the other Americans, Donald Hutchins and his wife Jane, had set up camp next to a Himalayan mountain stream. The remnants of their campfire are still here. The shepherds, who earn little enough renting huts and selling firewood to trekkers, are shattered that another year of tourism has been ruined for them. Mohammed Yusuf saw the militants run on up the track, leaving 2 guards with the Hutchins. The militants found the 2 British couples camping further up the valley. Paul Wells and Keith Mongan were taken here. The 2 Britons were last seen camping outside the inaptly named Paradise Hotel, this tin shack in the field behind me. Since then, no militant movements have been seen in this part of the Kashmir Valley. But in the neighbouring valley yesterday, a German tourist was picked up by militants. His seizure ended hopes that the first kidnap was an isolated incident. David Loyne, BBC News, Kashmir.
Here, the newly appointed Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Heseltine, has denied suggestions that he'll be taking over large areas of policy from his cabinet colleagues. In a BBC interview, he said that would be counterproductive and that most of his work would be done behind the scenes. But the opposition parties claim that splits are already appearing in the new cabinet.
King of all he surveys, if some versions of his job description are to be believed, Michael Heseltine seemed at pains this morning to play down the vast amount of power